Okay, welcome everyone to the Shift Connect conference. I'm Jacob Quinton, one of the students in the conference course this year. On behalf of our class and our professor, Dr. Red Thomas, I'm pleased to welcome you to this event hosted by the School of Planning at Dalhousie University. First and foremost, we are grateful to be able to live, work, and play on Mi'kmaq, the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. We thank our Dalhousie Elder in Residence, Jerry Muscala Blanc, for opening our conference with a blessing this year, as she has done in previous years. We would also like to thank our sponsors, the Atlantic Planners Institute, Licensed Professional Planners Association of Nova Scotia, Turner Drake and Partners Limited, FBM, Fathom, ZAP, and the Dalhousie University President's Office. I'm pleased to welcome you to this panel today on libraries. And I'll introduce you to our panelists now. So we have Danielle McDonald. Danielle is the Chief Executive Officer of the Ottawa Public Library, North America's largest bilingual public library. Danielle provides strategic leadership and sound financial guidance over all of OPL's departments, programs, and services. Danielle represents OPL on a number of industry committees, including Canadian Urban Libraries Council, Urban Libraries Council, and chief executives of large public libraries of Ontario. Since joining the OPL in 2009, Danielle has led significant initiatives in facilities planning and development across OPL's 33 branches. Most recently, Danielle negotiated the letter of intent and final funding approval for Ottawa's $192 million historic collaboration with Library and Archives Canada on a joint landmark library facility scheduled to welcome visitors in 2025. Danielle holds an MPA from Carleton University and a BE.S. From BE.S. in Urban Regional Planning from the University of Waterloo. Her educational background is complemented by more than 30 years of municipal government management experience, including strategic planning, finance, human resources, and technology with the City of Ottawa and OPL. Serving 1 million residents, OPL helps to build community and transform lives through its mission to inspire learning, spark curiosity, and connect people. Second, we have Julie Iannacone. Julie is the Director of Neighborhood and Youth Services at Vancouver Public Library. She believes that public libraries play a critical role in building and supporting healthy communities. She leads strategic direction and policy and resource allocation for 20 neighborhood branches, citywide services for children and teens, and community engagement initiatives and partnerships. She is responsible for strategic planning and development of new and renewed library facilities with several active projects and others in preliminary planning stages. She is a mentor for the Interlink project, Library Leaders Excellent and Development, that's LEAD, and a graduate of the Canadian Urban Libraries Council Public Library Leaders Program. And finally, last but not least, we have Osa Kachen. Ms. Kachen oversees 400 staff across 14 branch library systems here in Halifax as the CEO of Public Libraries. HPL received international acclaim with the opening of Halifax's new Central Library. Osa and her team continue to capture attention through the modernization of library service and through services, programs, and welcoming spaces that reach diverse populations. Prior to taking the role in 2014, Osa spent 16 years in senior administrative roles at universities, most recently serving 10 years as Assistant VP Enrollment, Management, and Registrar at Dalhousie. Osa volunteers her time with community organizations, including serving as a board member and chair of the Governance Committee of the United Way of Halifax. Osa is also a member of the Governing Council of the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, the Library and Archives Canada Stakeholder Forum, and the Centre for Equitable Library Access. A few details before we start this session. First, we're using the Zoom webinar software, which only allows presenters to speak. So there's a Q&A icon in the bottom right of your screen, which at any point during the presentation, you can post questions. So yeah, feel free to add them at any time. And as the moderator, I'll refer to those after the presenters are finished. Second, along with me, present are Dr. Ren Thomas, Travis Nickel, and Eric Lindsay, who will also be assisting as needed, taking notes or screenshots and screenshots for our website, and also if anyone loses their connection, readmitting them. So the general timeline for the session, each speaker will get about 10 minutes to speak, and then I'll open up the floor for questions. So at last, I'd like to pass it over to Danielle McDonald.
Thank you, Jacob, and thank you for that introduction. Good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast. Good morning to those of us still in Ottawa and West, and welcome. I'm so glad to be here, particularly with my colleagues, Osa and Julie. Thank you for spelling out the bios, because that helps with my introduction. And I just wanted to sort of go back a bit and give you a little bit of a story. So as you can see, my first degree is in urban planning at the University of Waterloo many years ago, perhaps before some of you were even born. But nevertheless, back in the day, as they say, it was required to obviously submit your marks for the application process. And they also conducted an interview. And when they came to Ottawa to interview me, they asked me a question, and the question was, who designed the city of Ottawa? Who was responsible for that urban plan? And I knew that answer because I've been studying that. And the answer, of course, was the French architect Jacques Greber, who was required to design the National Capital Region. And I always remember looking out from the hotel room up the Elgin Street area where he had started, and had sort of influence on his design. And as a planner, I was really interested in urban design, but I never actually worked full-time as a planner. I did, stints as summer students and other things, and I ended up getting involved in municipal government. But what I realized is in my ability to work in the library, I had great influence over urban designs through the facilities that I've been able to be part of with our team. And the fact, as was mentioned, this wonderful new central library that we are building, the picture being behind me. And what's happening with this project, a joint partnership with Library and Archives Canada, is this particular building behind me will now form the western edge of where Ottawa is going to grow. And it's going to lead development and actually regentrify a whole area, what we call the Breton Flats right now. And I thought, quite honestly, never in my days as a library person would I do this, but I certainly didn't even think I'd get to it as an urban planner. And to have the privilege to be able to come toward the end of my career to do something so spectacular that means so much to me in terms of a great city building project, but also knowing that the library is that piece of community service and that public infrastructure that is just going to make Ottawa and sort of be the finishing piece is something that gives me great pride. So I wanted to share that with you as sort of a beginning as to what's possible in the work that you do, and to really underscore the importance and the value that libraries bring to the community, and particularly how they contribute to the design of a city. So let me tell you a little bit more about Ottawa, a few quick facts. As mentioned, we have 33 branches. We have a bookmobile, we have a kiosk, and we have a very strong virtual channel. You know that we're the largest bilingual library in North America, and that's English-French. We have the largest geography within our limit that we provide services, our geographical limit. You can fit Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton, or half of PEI. And our mayor always loves to point this out, that we have such a large geography. And of course, that certainly provides a few challenges for providing services. We are a city of 1 million and growing. We have more than 600 employees. Our oldest is 79, our youngest is 17. So you can imagine how you plan for different interests in your staff. Our management comprises 5% of our organization. The union members really comprise the balance of 95. I report to a board So I don't report into the city. I report separately to a board, but we are funded primarily by the city, somewhat by the province. And we have 9 trustees on our board, 4 of which are councillors that sit at city council, and the remaining are public trustees. And my chair is a councillor. So, this whole conference is about how have we shifted, how have we addressed, how libraries in particular, in this instance, have addressed the challenges of the pandemic. And I think I have to say OPL has done really what many other libraries have done, and we have risen to the challenge. I think libraries are extremely resilient, and they have done a great job through COVID providing service. Our response has been comprehensive. It's been based, quite frankly, on limited information that came in dribs and drabs, and has required us really to shift, because we certainly never thought that the pandemic would be this long. I know when we were sitting in our boardroom over a year ago, we were thinking, a couple of months, we'll be back. Months turned into quarters, turned into a year. I don't think any of us really understood the magnitude of what was ahead of us, and we required a plan. We had to shut down fully. And since June, we've been back in business, not fully operational, but have been operational and have not had to shut down our services since. The outcome really has been positive. People have really viewed us as key in the community, and in some cases have really felt that we have been a lifeline to continue our services. So let me tell you specifically what we did to provide service. First of all, we increased our virtual presence. We created a bilingual landing page called Isolation Recreation. We doubled our ebook purchases because we knew people were going to be looking for more e-content, particularly given that we had to shut down physical branches. We introduced virtual programming. We hadn't done that before. We did events virtually. We partnered with people virtually. We live streamed, we recorded, we posted on YouTube, and we really tried to cull new memberships virtually. We introduced new initiatives. It's amazing when you are faced with a challenge and time constraints, things that I heard before, well, yes, we'll get to that. I don't know if we can do it. Boy, oh boy, we snapped to it. We were able to purchase better software to communicate more quickly and effectively with our customers, because that was key. We only had one way to communicate. Introduced virtual board meetings. We had never done that before. We developed an in-house booking system to pick up holds. We created virtual one-on-one appointments and started piloting e-chat sessions. We started working remotely. That was one of those things that people said, oh, well, yes, we'll do that, but I don't know, how can we do that? Well, it's amazing. We shut down, March 16th, March 17th, we're all working from home. Quick turnaround on that. And I suspect we will always have some kind of virtual presence, people working at home as well. We developed new partnerships, virtual programs and local events, Ottawa International Writers Fest with Library and Archives Canada, our partner, and even the US Embassy. And we also work with school boards during this time. Digital inclusion became something that was really important to us, because we knew that in closing our physical locations and creating a solid virtual channel, that did not mean services would be accessible to everyone. So we went out and provided 200 Chromebooks and 20 Wi-Fi hotspots to 30 community partners that really needed this support. We brought forth policy changes to permanently waive the requirement to pay late fees. For us, that had been identified as a barrier to people coming and using our services. We started to basically waive fees during the pandemic, and we just decided in September, October of last year to make good on that policy change. And we went to council, and that was a $1 million ask out of our budget, but we have felt that it was probably one of the best $1 million we have spent. And now in Ottawa, you no longer have to pay late fees, no matter who you are. And that really helped 11,000 people in our community who had their access blocked or were heading towards collections. These are the most vulnerable in our community, and really they should not have had to be in this position. So that was a real coup as well. We kept our Central Library project going. We had our unveil pre-pandemic. We were able to do Indigenous consultations online very successfully, such that the design you see behind you is one that was influenced externally and internally by Indigenous and members of our public. We were able to do a blessing on the site, and we continue to move this very key project forward to final design, hopefully getting a shovel in the ground this year. We also have 31 out of 33 libraries, or will as of April, open for service, but not full service. So as I wind up here, I just want to share a few key lessons with you that we learned, because libraries are really about learning. Data is crucial. It's really helpful to have good data about your services and your systems and what you're doing as you're planning changes particularly, and to support decisions. Our board appreciated that. And I think, we found that in many cases there were polarized feelings out there in the community, and data helped support some of the changes we needed to bring forward with the community and with our staff. Communications, everybody knows that, but they're complex during, such a pandemic. And they're also important, in terms of being clear and concise with many audiences, our board, our staff, our customers, and so on. Just scrolling out here, planning with limited information. It's always nice to develop a plan, but if you don't have all the information, somehow you think, I don't know that I can continue. The pandemic has taught us you just have to. And sometimes developing a plan in spite of, some key details lacking is still important in helping to manage expectations of staff and customers. Thinking ahead, make sure your plans are agile. You may not have all the answers, but you have to have the ability to rotate a bit. And, we tried to build safety and work with our health, Ottawa Public Health, to guide the development of any plans we did. And finally, as I close, collaboration with others. Libraries are great collaborators, and I consider myself very fortunate to be part of a library community with leaders that are willing to get together and talk and share information. And that's one of the things I've always enjoyed about libraries, and how it's okay to ask those questions, because together we are really able to get through some things, within our country that, we may not be in the same area, but we share similar concerns. And I've always valued the fact that my colleagues have been so collaborative and forthcoming with helping in any information. And I think that's really how we have been able to get through the pandemic and continue to move forward. And I'll now turn it over to my colleagues, who I'm sure will share their stories with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Danielle. That was really an interesting summary of the year. And I think many of the things you talked about reflect our experiences here in Vancouver. Today, I'm coming to you from the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations here in Vancouver. And unlike Danielle, I have spent my entire career in public libraries, mostly at one institution. I had a bit of an accidental, or perhaps a careless, start in public libraries. I really didn't think about it much. I had a part-time job in high school, putting books back on shelves, and I kept that job through high school and through an undergraduate degree, kind of balanced it with retail and fast food and all of the other things that young people do. And then really started to think about the library as a career. So went on to do a master's in library science. So I went straight kindergarten through that master's degree, and then right into a full-time job as a children's librarian when I was 23. And I think I have to say something about why I stayed. So why did I stay? Well, I found I loved it. I was really lucky to fall into public libraries, and certainly in the library, while it's been mostly the same institution, there has been continuous change, continuous learning. When I started in public libraries, public library service happened primarily in public library buildings. There were card catalogs, paper records, no personal computers, no internet, nothing digital, nothing. So it's a complete evolution really in those years, and I've been proud to be a part of it. And yeah, it has been a learning game the whole way, even though it's the same business that I've been in. I have been in my current role for 2.5 years, and it's quite different than I expected, I'll be honest. So one part of the role is very predictable. I'm responsible for the operations of those 20 branches at the city. We have our central library plus 20 branches. And so I oversee the service that's delivered at those branches and in the local communities, community services, services for children and teens. And I really understand that work. That's where my roots are. I spent a lot of my career in branches. However, I spend less than half of my time doing that, which I thought was the biggest part of the job. And I'm fully supported by a team of managers and an associate director who really do most of that work. What I didn't understand before I came into this position was how much of the job was about facilities development. We have several branches in various stages of development, and I didn't expect to be spending more than half of my time in development meetings or preparing for development meetings. As I mentioned, several active projects, I had no background. My first month in the position was really a blur. I set a meeting with the director of facilities or real estate and facilities management at the City of Vancouver, and she gave me an overview of the development process. I took lots of notes, asked a few questions, but we had an hour together. And I would say that at the end of the hour, I read my notes and I understood about 25% of what I had written down, and not the rest. So I went to meetings where people used terminology that I didn't understand. I asked a couple of questions in those meetings, but couldn't take up the whole meeting saying, what does that acronym mean? And what does that one mean? So I looked things up and I learned along the way, and yeah, just tried to follow along. After a couple of months, I went back and reread those notes from that meeting with the director and understood maybe 50%. And I haven't read them recently, but I think I'd be closer to 90% now. But yeah, it was a real education by doing. So the way we work on facilities development, and I think I'm going to talk about this for a minute because it is very interesting to me, is we work with the City of Vancouver's Real Estate and Facilities Management Department on every project. And each project has a project manager. And that project manager is an architect. And they are generally our key contact with consultants, developers, et cetera, and a range of other experts that we work with. So I would say that Danielle's experience and background is not typical in public libraries, a real asset that Ottawa has in Danielle. And a lot of public libraries are kind of bumbling along, working with experts. Of course, we plan and consult and so on. But really, we didn't have a lot of internal expertise, and we relied on that real estate and facilities management group. So we're trying to build some internal expertise, not just at the director level, but at other parts of the organization. So in 2018, we completed our facilities master plan. So that sets a roadmap and a strategic framework to guide the planning and decision-making for our physical facilities over the next 25 years. I think an even bigger difference maker, and it's still very new, is that we hired a facilities planner position. So that person began in September of 2020, and in just a few months has dramatically improved our process and internal capacity. So she attends all of the development meetings across the city. She provides insight and expertise. And I would say the most important thing she does is she writes our feedback and or illustrates it by redoing plans and so on, and sends that back to the developers or consultants. So yeah, it's been critical, I think, and a game changer for us to actually have some internal expertise. Now, the Vancouver context, you probably know a few things about Vancouver, I'm going to assume. It's a gorgeous city on the ocean with beautiful mountain views. It's a multicultural city of immigrants with over 50% of people here speaking a language, the first language other than English. It's a very small city geographically. Danielle gave you a hint of that. So it's the biggest city by population in British Columbia, with a population approaching 700,000, but it's 114 square kilometers or 44 square miles. So it is quite tiny geographically, and it is exceptionally dense. So the population density is the highest in the country. And we expect continuing densification, and it is becoming a city of high rises. Now, development in Vancouver was still booming, not as much as it had been earlier, but pre-COVID was still booming, with pre-sale condos, going up, selling before the ground was broken. And housing experts, local housing experts here, talk about Vancouver's development addiction. So how we've been over-relying on development to fund public benefits and amenities, including public libraries, and how that's really not going to be there for us in the future. The current city council priority is to address the housing crisis, and people can't afford to live in the city. So there is a real push for rental housing and non-market rental in particular. The city is full of aging infrastructure, which I'm sure most Canadian cities are, and libraries are not at the top of the list for, in terms of what state they're in, although we do have some issues. So cutting down to the Vancouver Public Library, we're very well funded. We have an interesting and diverse population, as I mentioned, and wide-ranging socioeconomic status, much like urban cities everywhere. Our most valuable assets, I would say, number one is our staff, and number two is our facilities. And that speaks to what we're talking about today around that social and civic infrastructure. So we have free open spaces and programs, and we are a resource and a place to connect. 20 branches, and because we're 44 square miles or 114 kilometers, that means they're really close together. When I was thinking about this talk today, I thought about my time in the southeast corner of the city. I worked quite a long time there, and we had branches within 2 kilometers of each other, 2.4. Then I started to think about the city bigger picture. So my office now is at the Central Library, and there are 4 branches within 2 kilometers of the Central Library. I can walk from my library, Central Library, to the Carnegie branch. It's 1.4 kilometers. I can walk 800 meters from there to the Nuts Strathcona Library. I can walk 2 kilometers from there to Britannia branch and another 2 kilometers to Hastings branch. So, that's all, so someone could do that in a day. So when we talk about complete and connected cities, Vancouver's very well positioned to have libraries within walking distance, transit, cycling distance. However, we are so dense and we have so many branches. I would suggest we have too many branches, because most of our branches are tiny. They range from 2,000 to 1,600 square feet. Now, we have a lot of real estate. We have one of the highest per capita of Canadian urban libraries, but when we take out our central library, which comprises 70% of our square footage, we have this 30% of our square footage distributed through our 20 branches. And in fact, if we look at that, those are very, very low per capita square footage. So we're kind of imbalanced and would do better to have probably fewer branches that were more well-resourced, larger, but our city is a city of neighborhoods, and public outcry anytime we even think about closing a branch. So that's not going to happen. Our newest branch is our Nuts Strathcona branch, and that is the first major civic building in Vancouver to have an official Indigenous name. The word Nuts embodies the concept of we are one in Hunkaminam or Musqueam language. The Strathcona part of it reflects the historic nature of the neighborhood. That building is a unique partnership between the City of Vancouver and the library and the YWCA. And the library is on the main floor of that building, and then YWCA offices above that on the second floor, and then supportive housing for women, low-income single mothers and their children on the 4 floors above that. So that's a unique situation for us, but I think it reflects more and more how public libraries are looking to think about where to position themselves and co-locate and so on. Just a little note on the naming. There was a lot of pressure in the neighborhood. It's in Vancouver's historic Chinatown, yet we really wanted to reflect an Indigenous name, and that will come up more and more in some of our neighborhoods. So we chose the Indigenous name for the branch and have meeting rooms with names that reflect the local Chinese culture. Danielle mentioned statistics, and I'm just going to talk about those for a minute. We love data in public libraries, and we measure all kinds of things, and we get rankings so we know where we sit compared to each other. We use that information to make decisions, to perhaps position a budget request with council or to talk to our board. We measure things like the number of card holders, the circulation, number of digital visits. We measure all kinds of things, and we rank them, and we figure out where we fit, and we talk about our value and how we're serving the community. There's something we don't measure, and I think it's really a relevant thing when we're talking about facilities. Or at least I shouldn't say all of us. I don't know if other libraries are doing this, but we are not doing it as a standard measurement, and that is the dwell rate. So we can tell you how long people stay on our web pages. We can do that digitally. What we're not telling is the story of how long people are staying in the library. And as I've said, I had a very long career in public libraries, and I can tell you anecdotally that has changed significantly. It used to be more transactional. People would come, they would get their books, they might go to story time, and then they'd leave. And now, as we have people living in smaller spaces and faced with all of the stresses of living in a city and raising a family and so on, it's very different. People come to work to do their jobs in the library. They're living in a small space. They need to, or they just want to be with other people. Parents come to story time and stay and chat with each other for hours after the story time's over. It's completely different. It looks different in different parts of the city. On the wealthier side of the city, it's more transactional still. People might be coming in, getting some books, then taking their child to whatever sport or activity that they're involved in. Whereas in the neighborhoods that are less wealthy, people are coming because they're not going home to a bedroom, perhaps for every child, a digital device or 2 for every family member, and so on. So there is a real need for that public space and the digital resources we provide. I haven't talked a lot about COVID, but I will say that we knew before COVID that we played a critical role in providing space and reducing social isolation. And we quickly pivoted, as Danielle said, to digital services. We thought about who was living alone. We thought about who needed us most. And we had a lot of programs reaching out to seniors, children. They were open to all, but we were thinking about those audiences. And our first programs were very much about projecting out. So Facebook Live, YouTube, people could listen, watch, they could comment in the chat, of course, on both of those mediums. But as we went along, we tried to think about how we could improve the experience. And our latest story times, we still have the Facebook Live, but we're having small group Zoom programs. And I'm going to end with a comment from a patron. So the reason we switched to some small group programs is we wanted people to be able to meet. So small registered faces on the screens. And we got this comment from a patron who came to one of those, and I'll end with that. Thank you so much. I really appreciate what you're doing. We are relatively new in this country, and all the craziness around the pandemic has made things more difficult for me as a mom. It's difficult to raise my daughter without more children and moms around. Things will change soon for us, I hope. But in the meantime, thanks for that little window of love and support. So yeah, I think that really sums up what the library is to people. Over to you, Lisa. Oh, so, excuse me.
All right, so I'm going to try my best to sort of tuck in the open spaces between what Julie and Danielle have said. I'll maybe start with a couple of notes about our COVID experience here in Halifax. You know, not unlike Danielle and Julie in their library systems, this was a fast pivot, and I know the word pivot's been overused a lot, so that's the last time I'll use it in this presentation. You know, we switched to curbside delivery, we live streamed, we found ways to let people sign up for new memberships, and within a few weeks, 10,000 new people had found us, and of course, we're only a community of 400,000. We began to work remotely. We worried a lot about digital inclusion, so our IT teams went into the buildings to boost Wi-Fi, to spill it as far into the community as we could. Lots of virtual programming, lots of live streaming. Staff did the most amazing things. They would, you know, they would cook from their home kitchens as sort of a way of continuing some of that food programming. We created phone lines. One of the great worries that was expressed to us by our colleagues in public health was, you know, we have a hard time getting hold and sharing even information on symptoms of COVID, and with people who don't think to call us, who can't get onto our website. And so we trained up our staff on the library phone line and said, you know what, phone us if you're feeling lonely. We did outreach to some of our users who we knew were older and particularly vulnerable. We shared information, we provided tech support. Sometimes the tech support led to the loaning of a device to that particular person who was at risk. And of course, we worked with our colleagues in public health around making sure that people had accurate information. Like Danielle, we jumped on the remove the fines and BE.S, let's do it forever kind of bandwagon. Lots of public love for that. And what's so interesting is, as an organization, if we think about ourselves as belonging to the people, the idea of ever having had processes and barriers in place to stop people from accessing what fundamentally belongs to them. So think about it like a barricade in a street. You know, the public built the street. Are you now going to stop people from being able to use the infrastructure that they've built? So thinking differently about public libraries and not thinking that somehow restricting access was going to make our public more responsible. So we had 35,000 people in Halifax who had been barred from using the library due to overdue fines. And we had our staff had overheard people for years saying, you know, kids, yes, we can come here, but you can't take anything home because we don't know if we can get it home on time. And what COVID has taught us is that the vulnerabilities that exist in our community are layered. So somebody who has poor access to transportation, who has sporadic or shift work, or may face food insecurity, may have many children, they are then disproportionately less likely to ever be able to pay their library fines. So really, really proud of that. That was sort of taking hold of a pandemic and achieving a greater social outcome while we were at it. Food insecurity is a big issue in our community, and we had been doing a lot of food programming at our library, and we put food out. We actually used food sharing as a way of improving behavior in the public library. Our gut was, none of us behaves our best in public space when we're hangry. So the idea of giving out bananas and fruit and having coffee on for people actually had an enormous improved life in the library. But of course, with COVID, we couldn't do that anymore. So our staff shifted and started packing snack packs and lunches, free printing, free photocopying. We sort of said, no holds barred, whatever we can do, let's move to do it. And I think Danielle talked a little bit about the governance of libraries. I think our governance structure actually is part of what allows us to be able to actually make decisions. So go from concept to decision relatively quickly and just start doing it, which I know for some of our colleagues who work more in a formal municipal structure, like folks in recreation, for example, they didn't quite have the autonomy that was required to be able to turn things around so quickly. So really pleased with how we took hold of that authority and could work really quickly to respond to the community. A couple of things that really emerged for us in terms of, great challenges that our communities face that became more profound during the COVID period. And I think about issues like digital divide. It became quite clear when we were relying on websites as a form of communicating matters as simple as, how to protect yourself from a pandemic. It made me wish some days, and not that we should go back to what would have happened during the wartime, but during the wartime, of course, a plane would fly overhead and they'd drop leaflets down on people, and that was how they could communicate. I'm not advocating that, but what I will say is this new reliance on digital really works to transcend barriers for some people who have barriers of access. So may have a disability where digital provides access where there was none before. But for others, it really highlights that disconnect. So that is a big issue that's emerged that libraries are grabbing hold of. And to me, the equitable access to broadband and to IT infrastructure and to web Wi-Fi is really the profound issue of our time. It also was a time when we needed to try to figure out how we were going to channel disinformation. I think this past year, we have all these electronic channels for sharing, but they're also great channels for spreading disinformation, creating distrust in authorities, polarizing people's political opinions. And one of our great challenges going forward is really going to be, how do we leverage public spaces for discourse? And I had a conversation with somebody yesterday who said, well, we don't want to get political. And I thought, well, let's take climate change. Climate change is actually not a political issue. Climate change is a scientific challenge that we face in our communities. And so that's pretty well founded in science. Now there's disinformation out there, but fundamentally it's based in science. And how do we leverage our public libraries as places where people who may have disparate opinions can come together? Certainly racism, gender inequality, public safety, big issues that have emerged, mental health. To me, those are big challenges, and we need to also, as public infrastructure, think about how we respond to those challenges. So let's take public safety as a really simple example. We know, those of us who work in libraries, that we provide a safe place for people all day long, every day. And so there was a great worry when our branches closed about who is additionally vulnerable, because we used to be the place they could come to escape violence at home, to vulnerability of life on the street, and so on. That public space and the role of public spaces in public safety is really profound. We have talked often, when people think of public safety, they think about the response to lack of safety. So they think about police response. We need to back that conversation up and say, how do we create the places in our community where people can have access to good information, can have somebody triage them to resources? Those are fundamental roles that we can play. And I think, if anything, certainly in Nova Scotia with the Portapique, all the deaths that occurred at Portapique, the ways that unwrapped issues of domestic violence and safety in our community. As public institutions, we need to say, so we can't just be peripheral to that. Let's take a lead. So, a challenging question might be, if we know that domestic violence, women and children are at greatest risk of domestic violence, on Christmas Day, Boxing Day, New Year's Day. Should we really be closed those days, or should we be open to really serve our communities in the way that we should? Really interesting conversations that were not really happening to the same degree. And certainly the UN Safe Cities initiatives for women, lots of interesting conversations, matters of race, places where we can have conversations to unwrap some of the challenges are really important. A couple of other areas where we've really moved that have turned out to be handy are outdoor libraries. So where is the intersection between our public buildings and the surrounding neighborhoods that actually unwrap us a little bit for the community and actually provide a really interesting connection. We're putting a lot of emphasis on that. And also we're looking not just at where we have branches, but where do we not? And so like many public institutions, our branches have tended to be built for historic reasons in particular neighborhoods and not in other neighborhoods. So we have of our 14 branches, we have some small branches in rural communities that serve a really important role, but then we have other areas like the Preston Township, a historic Black community that has never historically had a library. And so we have begun to now, with intention, look at what I think of as, people talk about food deserts because they don't have access to food. We need to think about library deserts and how we respond to that. Overall, I think that the work and the network of colleagues, I think, as I reflect on the last year, has just been profound. And Danielle talked about this too. We were all trying to figure out, do we have to disinfect every book? Can we let people into our spaces? What about the air that they breathe? How do we support our staff working in new ways? And we all leaned in toward each other, and we ended up coming up very quickly saying, why is Danielle trying to solve all these problems in Ottawa? I can solve them in Halifax with Danielle, with Julie, with our colleagues across the country. So we did some really great think tank work early on, and I think that saved us all. I don't know that there's been a single case of infection spreading at any public library in this country. So really proud of the work that we did from a public health perspective. And I think we saved each other's sanities while we were at it. So worked on many levels. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Love to hear some questions. Ask us about the things that you're curious about. To me, libraries are those anchor tenants in our neighborhoods. And if we can become less proprietary about them and hand them back to the public in a sense, which is everything from removing fines to expanding into open outdoor spaces to leaving our Wi-Fi on 24/7, that can happen in a lot of ways. But there is really an opportunity for us to leverage these valuable public spaces in building communities where people thrive. And I think that's ultimately what gets us each up every morning. And, really, is the tone with which we collaborate across our communities in terms of having the greatest impact we can. So there's one attendee, I don't know, I can broker the questions if somebody wants to. There's one attendee who said, with the change in usage Julie mentioned, and anecdotally the shift at Central, how have libraries shifted to better serve communities as a whole, as people use them for more and more purposes? I'll maybe start with this, but then I think Julie and Danielle can jump in. This is a really important question because we don't, gone are the days where we had all this formality and people came for a single purpose, either to read in place or to borrow and leave the building. Really interesting question for us. And it's not without its challenges because, of course, one day somebody wants a library to be a quiet, reflective space, and the next day they want a cooking class or a breakdancing, or a choir starts to sing. So we want to be all those things. I think the challenge for us is not should we be those things, it's how do we create spaces that allow us to be those things, and in fact build buildings that actually, and Central's an interesting example of this, that have pretty good sound management, that can have something loud on the second floor and you could be on the fourth floor in a corner and be relatively quiet. It's a design challenge, but we should be just responding to what our community needs in a lot of ways, because we are that democratic public space that's accessible to everyone. But Julie and Danielle may have more comments on that from their perspectives.
I can jump in on a quick comment, thinking about a pragmatic approach to that cross purposes kind of wish for use in the libraries. Our Oak Ridge branch is under redevelopment and it will be a 25,000 square foot library. So very exciting for us, biggest branch in a civic facility, civic center. And as also mentioned, we have that push and pull for libraries to be active and busy and noisy places with children's programming and choirs and all of that sort of thing. And we have people who really are coming to work or focus or even read. Just still people are coming and they want to sit in place in a comfy chair and read. And one of the ways we're looking at addressing that need for quiet space, lots of libraries, of course, are building in more meeting rooms. We're looking at a telephone booth-like pod. So those exist. So, something very small that someone could use to come in, do a Zoom meeting, do an interview for a job because they can't do it at home because of their pet, if they're in a studio, or their children or so on, the competing noises. So actually thinking creatively about how do we define space, and it doesn't have to be completely in the full structure of the facility. It could be something quite as basic as putting a pod here and there. So we will have about 10 of those pods in that Oak Ridge branch, plus larger meeting rooms for 4, 8, 12, 16 people. But yeah, so just a couple, thinking about how to have an enclosed space that isn't perfectly soundproof, but still meets that need to have a quiet place to work in a space other than your own home.
So maybe I'll come in and add a few things. First of all, I think when I look back, I go, we build libraries for different communities, and sometimes one size doesn't fit all. You need to recognize that, and you need to talk to your customers, survey them. It's, there may be a baseline of service that you agree as an organization to provide, but each community can even develop the character of that particular library through input, through architecture, and it's still a library, but it functions for that community. And I think of, our own central library. We have had extensive conversations with the community, and it's interesting what you can find when you ask them, what do they want? Sometimes we think we know, and we're surprised to realize, oh, maybe we thought we did, but we haven't got the right mix. So it's important to be open to ideas and recognize that, needs change over time. So designs in libraries need to be flexible and agile. And I mean, we're not sufficiently funded that I would argue we can change up our decor and do everything as much as we should. So we have to be very practical and design that space to offer alternatives and options for people. And I know that in our central library, we very clearly heard there are spaces that will be more active and oriented towards, people discovering and doing things. But we are putting in sensory rooms, areas of quiet space where you can, sort of find your inner strength and peace, and still allow you to work and to live and to, enjoy the library service. So it's a bit of a challenge in a sense, but it's actually quite comforting to know that you can have a space that really does accommodate a lot of different needs. And yet at the same time, we recognize people learn in different ways. So it seems to make sense that we would address that through the way that we design and develop our spaces. But I can tell you, when we've surveyed, sometimes it has been really helpful. And to do it, is not all the time, but you kind of have to make sure that you build that in and look at that information to see that you are adjusting. But I'd have to say, when you look across the country, there are wonderful examples of how libraries are responding to different needs. And it's inspiring to look at different libraries and see what they're doing and think, oh, maybe we could do that with the Ottawa twist, So maybe I'll leave it on that. Thank you.
Thanks.
You
You can go ahead.
You can go ahead, Jacob.
Oh, no, were you going to say something? That's fine.
Well, I was just going to add, this sort of purpose for the community is a really interesting thing. And then both Danielle and Julie have talked about, it shifts over time. I think as we head into these next couple of years, there is a really interesting opportunity we have as libraries in what I would term as community recovery. So we have had a community where people have almost been desocialized from one another due to the pandemic. So lots, I think there will be a mental health challenge that we haven't even begun to sort of get a handle on about, what happens. We certainly have seen it in polarization of opinions where you just sit in your own little zone and you don't hear any other perspective than the one that an AI bot has fed back to you on Google. So we've got lots of things going on, but I think if we, as libraries, we're really in a unique position because we are that common space, or almost the sort of modern town square, that, you know, being really intentional about how we draw people back in, how we create those connections that I hope will heal our communities and will create that connection back to where we live and who we live with. And you know, the long-term health impact of loneliness is, we can't afford that. So we need to act, and nor should people suffer, right? So we have lots of reasons why we should really put our energy toward that community rebuilding. And certainly I think the libraries are well positioned to lead that recovery of sorts.
Great, thank you. If there's no other questions from the attendees, which I don't think there is, we have a couple of questions here just prepared in the event that there was no questions from the audience. One of those is, what do you folks think, what do you folks think that planners or municipal governments can do to help libraries flourish, particularly in the context of all this sort of the post-COVID context that you discussed today?
So Danielle, do you want to start? I saw you unmute your
Yeah,
phone. Go forward.
okay. Well, you know, having crossed the line from the municipality to the library, I think they could do a lot, quite frankly. I think, first of all, we should be a forethought, not an afterthought, when it comes to city building. For us, we've worked well with the city. You know, Julie, when you described your process, it sounds very similar to what we do. We're not arguing that we would do everything ourselves. We know what we know we're good at, and we know that we need expertise in certain areas. So we have to work together. But, you know, let's face it, we're all funded by the same taxpayer. So there's a real incentive from a business perspective alone. And the argument we made that it makes so much sense to work together. So when you're doing urban design, particularly at the, you know, initial stages, think about libraries. You only have to look at your own library in Halifax, Vancouver, Calgary, to see how the development of particularly central libraries has had an enormous impact on the neighborhoods around them and the development. Changing areas of the city that maybe at one point weren't deemed to be as beautiful from an urban design perspective. And not only adding that architectural significance of a public space, but the other benefits that are accrued from public space that people trust because they see libraries at that space where they're comfortable. People that are new to our country often come to the library first. So if you're not putting this kind of infrastructure in cities and seeing the value and importance of it, I think you're missing out, because in my view, every great city has great libraries, and you just have to go with that one. You really have to put the money in and the time in and build that relationship. And it is a relationship. So I'll start with that.
Yeah, I think Danielle actually sort of grabbed hold of my starting point, which was really the forethought, not the afterthought. So I think that is very true. We, you know, our communities get a real bang for their buck in library investment. And, you know, sometimes we end up in situations where politicians or even senior municipal administrators have an outdated view of actually what libraries provide. So they think about it as, you know, an arts and culture luxury, as opposed to really core space as fundamental to public safety and neighborhood building and city building. So, and I would even say, before you even get to the library, and I see Jacob is on the call, which, you know, Jacob and I have had this conversation. When you're building new neighborhoods, reserve space for public infrastructure, right? So often it gets doled out and sold off to developers. I can't even imagine Julie's challenges in finding space for public infrastructure in Vancouver. You know, making sure that you reserve that space to say, how do we make this a complete community, so that, you know, even before the first neighborhood shovel starts in the ground, well, what is the traveling distance for this neighborhood to the closest library? Where could the library and active transportation intersect, right? If you've got a great network of trails, you know, libraries also serve as washrooms. We found out during the pandemic how many people rely on us to go to the bathroom. So thinking about, you know, the dovetailing of great public, fully accessible infrastructure with all the other things that you're trying to build in a neighborhood and in a city. And when you get it right, the magic is really, it's what makes a great city. So, so it's both having the land reserved in the right locations and thinking about how we connect with that other infrastructure.
I will just add yes to all of that, first of all. And then, just really understanding what the library is. It's a community hub. We live in Canada. It's not an outdoor country. People, I mean, it's warmer in Vancouver than it is in the rest of the country, but it rains a lot. So people need indoor spaces. And so when we think about those indoor spaces, if we think about, I think nobody would argue with the need for parks and beautiful, access to gorgeous parts of nature and trees and so on. Think about the library as somewhat of an indoor equivalent. People need somewhere to be. So don't build a book warehouse, build a beautiful space, because it is where people are going to be. And I think we have some absolutely gorgeous libraries. Many of our central libraries are particularly gorgeous. And we have some book warehouses, which are squares and, not places that really are conducive to spending time and being inspired and so on. So yeah, if we could just think about, aside from the resources that libraries offer, that space and that access to beauty should be something that we need to think about in Canada, because people can't be outside all the time.
Great.
Jacob, could I just add one thing? I just wanted to say, further to what you had said, Osa, about making the land available. I don't think many people understand that when libraries are funded, we have to, put people in the buildings, obviously, to provide the service. You have to pay money to architects, and great design is so important. I mean, we don't want an ugly building. But if the land is made available, that saves a lot to the library for the project, and we can focus on a better building and more services. So if you look at it more holistically and see that these spaces are actually very much a great function of a good working system in a city, then what you have to do is fund it. And we need that help, because you often just don't have enough money to do all of that.
And I would add to Danielle, thinking about public infrastructure. So it used to be that a shopping mall would be an anchor tenant, or it used to be actually we used to think of anchor tenants as a business. I think if we think of public infrastructure as an anchor tenant, the rest just grows around it, right? The communities come, the families come, you end up actually creating a really healthy heart to the community that is less susceptible to economic rise and fall, and is sort of a very trusted anchor location in a neighborhood that makes that neighborhood livable. So, so if you can sort of carry that with you throughout your careers, it is, we get a lot right if we remember that at the heart.
Great. That was very insightful, all of you. Thank you very much for your time today. We are coming to time. It's 12:59. This is wrapping up at 1. So again, on behalf of the SHIFT conference team and the Dalhousie School of Planning, I'd like to thank Danielle, Julie, and Osa. And we will be getting started in 1 minute with our next panel. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye now.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, so for anyone who is just joining us for this session, welcome to the Shift Connect conference. I'm Jacob Quinton, one of the students in the conference course. And on behalf of our class and our professor, Dr. Ren Thomas, I'm pleased to welcome you to this event, hosted by the Dalhousie School of Planning. We are grateful to live, work, and play on Mi'kmahi, the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And we'd also like to thank our Dalhousie University Elder in Residence, Jerry Masqua LeBlanc, for opening our conference with a blessing this year, as she has in previous years. And I'd also like to thank our sponsors, the Licensed Professional Planners Association of Nova Scotia, Atlantic Planners Institute, Turner Drake and Partners Limited, FBM, Fathom, ZAP, and the Dalhousie University President's Office. So Today, or in this session, we have Neil Lovett of Turner Drake and Jacob Ritchie of the Halifax Board of the Halifax Regional School Board. And now I'll pass it over to Tracy Wade of the Atlantic Planners Institute to moderate this session and give you some more detailed introductions. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. Good to see a good number of people on the session as well. So this session is about workplace education and COVID. And as Jacob said, we've got two speakers. I guess I should introduce myself. I'm Tracy Wade. I'm the chair of the Atlantic Planners Institute. I'm out of Sackville, New Brunswick. I've been a professional planner for let's say 20 years approximately, and I've worked in the private public sector at the provincial level, regional level, and municipal level as well. So, but right now I'm here as the chair of the Atlantic Planners Institute. So welcome you all from that perspective, and pleased to be a sponsor of the conference. So our two speakers today, first we've got Neil Lovett. He's a professional planner who leads the planning and economic intelligence divisions of Turner Drake and Partners, which is a real estate consultancy based in Halifax. Neil's work focuses on real estate market analysis, demographic and socioeconomic analysis and forecasting, and real estate finance and development economics. He and his team specialize in projects where the economics of the built environment intersect with the vision and goals of planning policy. So Neil is a graduate of Dalhousie's Bachelor of Community Design program and also holds diplomas in GIS and urban planning from Fanshawe